There's something that's been bothering me for the past, 20 some odd years or so. Roll the clip.
Les enfants terribles. You're fine. You got all of the old man's dominant genes. I got all the flawed, recessive genes. Everything was done so that you would be the greatest of his children. The only reason I exist is so they could create you.
So you're saying I'm the dominant one?
That's right. I'm just the leftovers of what they used to make you. Can you understand what it's like to know that you're garbage since the day you were born?
That's right, people. This has gone on long enough. It's time to talk about it.
Oh man. Oh God. Oh man. Oh God. Oh man.
Liquid's statement on its own isn't the issue. If it was just that, I wouldn't be jarred out of my sleep at night. But then Ocelot has to go and throw a wrench in the system like he always does.
Yes, the inferior one was the winner after all. That's right. Until the very end, Liquid thought he was the inferior one.
That declaration sparked a decades-long debate over which twin actually got Big Boss's dominant genes. Around when MGS1 first came out, most people agreed that Ocelot was telling President Solidus that Liquid Snake's genes were actually dominant, and he had been fooled into believing the opposite. But it took less than 5 minutes for common sense to rear its ugly head. People were quick to point out that Liquid's a blonde. Blonde hair is a recessive trait, so Liquid must have gotten all the recessive genes. But he's the superior clone, so how's that possible? Before we go any further, I gotta issue a couple disclaimers. First off, people on social media avoid this subject like the Rona, and rightfully so. It got to the point where there was so much confusion going around that it was impossible to even bring this up without people getting straight up vitriolic. Look at this. Just look at this. Just look at it. Eventually, members of the Metal Gear community reasoned that it's pointless to talk about the details of Snake and Liquid's DNA, because it completely undercuts the message of the story. The whole point of the game is that your genetic makeup doesn't determine what you're capable of. So it really doesn't matter which twin's genes are dominant or recessive, all you need to know is that Liquid Snake was engineered to be superior to Solid Snake some way, somehow. In other words, trying to answer this question does a massive disservice to the theme of the story. And that is a perfectly acceptable response if you have a habit of giving up. For science-holics like me and Otacon, leaving a question unanswered is a fate worse than death. I just can't let it go, not without doing everything I possibly can to solve the case. So brace yourselves, because we're about to Sherlock the shit out of this mystery. It goes without saying that the genetic science discussed in MGS1 is jacked up to hell and back. You have genes which get organized into chromosome pairs. Half of your chromosomes come from your dad, the other half come from your mom, and your physical features are determined by combining the genes you get from each parent. Let's use one of Liquid's examples to demonstrate.
Thanks to Father's DNA, they were able to identify more than 60 soldier genes responsible for everything from strategic thinking to the proverbial killer instinct.
For the sake of argument, let's say there's a murder gene which is a dominant trait, and you have two soldiers, Staff Sergeant Mommy and Lance Corporal Daddy. Both of them have a dominant and a recessive murder gene. If Mommy and Daddy had kids, there'd be a 75% chance that the murder gene would be expressed in their offspring. A quarter of the time, though, the resulting little tyke wouldn't have that proverbial killer instinct. That's not really how things work in the wacky world of Metal Gear, though. A lot of people over the years have rationalized what Ocelot said at the end of the game by proposing that soldier genes are actually recessive. It's an interesting idea that makes a lot of sense, but I'll let Commander Riker handle this one.
It never happened. It never happened. It never happened. It never happened. No way. Not a chance.
According to Liquid's monologue, the twin snakes are genetically identical, but Liquid's genes are recessive while Snake's are dominant. That means they both have the same exact DNA, one's just better than the other. Now, if you think that doesn't make any sense, you're absolutely right. The problem with Liquid's exposition dump is that it doesn't correlate to the science of the real world at all. But that's not his fault, he's off the hook for that. We all know if there's one person who deserves the blame for this, it's whoever wrote this garbage. But there's nothing we can do about it now. Besides, it's a fictional universe, so sometimes you just gotta accept the fact that things just work different in a land of make-believe. And that's really the crux of this discussion. If you can't wrap your head around the idea that the Metal Gear universe has its own laws of physics, we got nothing to talk about. Don't pass go, don't collect $200, just click the thumbs down and get out. But I hope you stick around, because things are about to get psycho. Let me talk about cloning techniques real quick to show you why this entire video is an exercise in futility. Cloning is actually a really common practice in farming. If you have an animal with desirable qualities, you can produce offspring through artificial insemination. Once a fertilized egg had divided into an embryo, you could split that up and implant those cells into multiple surrogate mothers. The result would be several identical siblings with a mix of the mother and father's DNA. So theoretically, if you had 8 surrogate mothers, the offspring they produced would be the equivalent of octuplets. Everybody's familiar with Dolly the sheep, right? Dolly was created using another technique known as somatic cell nuclear transfer. Using this process, you take the nucleus from an adult animal cell and implant it into an unfertilized egg, then transplant that into a surrogate. The resulting clone is genetically identical to the original animal. One might say Dolly was the spitting image of her mother. Did you catch all the hints we just threw in there? This is all going to be on the test, so I hope you're taking notes. Snake and Liquid are clones of Big Boss, but they're not exact duplicates like Solidus. Because of the different cloning techniques that were used, the twin snakes actually got some of their DNA from their egg donor.
We're not copies of our father, after all.
The reveal of Dr. Clark's assistant in MGS4 was a retcon, but that's why blood from the East flows through Snake and Liquid's veins. MGS1's official mission handbook described Big Boss as being a third-generation Japanese American, but after Snake Eater came out, all the extra details included in that guide were contradicted, so it's no longer regarded as canon. Because of that, Dr. Clark's assistant is now a major piece of the puzzle. If Snake and Liquid had been cloned using normal embryo cloning methods, their DNA would have actually been a 50-50 split between Big Boss and chronic traumatic RBF here. But the clones were actually altered at the genetic level to be more like Big Boss. If the clones hadn't been altered, the only way Liquid could have had blonde hair was if his Japanese egg donor also had a parent with blonde hair. Definitely possible, but highly unlikely. It just so happens that the clones were altered. A lot. And I can prove that Liquid Snake was altered to have blonde hair, and this was done to trick him and everybody else into thinking that he got the recessive genes. Liquid Snake and his brother are both purported to have IQs of 180. Now, you could assume that he doesn't have a fucking clue about genetics, but I don't think that's a good idea, because that would make Liquid less effective as a villain and as a rival for Snake. In any story, the antagonist needs to be at their strongest so the hero feels like an underdog. From a storytelling perspective, Liquid has to appear superior to Snake in every way. He needs to be stronger, more knowledgeable, and have more resources at his disposal. Otherwise, it won't feel like the protagonist has accomplished anything by the end. That just doesn't work if Liquid's talking out of his ass. Unfortunately, as much as I hate to admit it, that means we have to accept Liquid's mumbo-jumbo as scientific fact.
Warning. Internal bleeding detected. Vital signs critical.
Alright, here's the ugly truth. In the Metal Gear universe, dominant means superior, and recessive means inferior. Not just that, but dominant genes are healthy and functional, while recessive genes are abnormal, deformed, or possibly faulty. And interestingly enough, every member of Snake's support team was listening to Liquid's monologue, but at no point does anybody butt in and say,
"You keep using the word. I don't think it means what you think it means."
And since Liquid's never corrected at any point in the series, we have no choice but to go with it. In terms of actual biology, it's impossible for one clone to have all of Big Boss's dominant or recessive genes because both clones have blue eyes. Blue eyes are recessive, so no matter what, the clone who's supposed to be dominant would actually have a mixture of both dominant and recessive genes. That means the question we would be asking is which clone had fewer recessive genes than the other.
Because steel is heavier than feathers.
Let's take a trip to the Build-A-Clone workshop and make ourselves a perfect soldier. Pick some traits you think would make him more effective in battle. What do you think, brown hair for better camouflage, or blonde hair so the enemy can see him coming from a mile away even in pitch darkness? Good choice. What about eye color? Brown for natural sunscreen or blue for improved low light vision? Honestly, I think I would go blue on this one. So already, our perfect soldier has a combination of dominant and recessive genes. Obviously, if you were to do this in real life, the traits would be custom tailored depending on the mission, but in any situation, a hypothetical super soldier would have a combination of dominant and recessive traits. Did you know being short is a dominant trait? So is being nearsighted. The point is, a soldier that only has dominant or recessive genes would be completely useless in pretty much most scenarios. From that, we can finally conclude that Snake and Liquid's hair and eye color are actually irrelevant. Like I said, in the world of Metal Gear, dominant good, recessive bad. Get it? Alright, let's keep moving. Liquid was told that he had all Big Boss's recessive genes, meaning his genes were defective and therefore inferior to Snake's, but Ocelot confirmed that the opposite was true. So is there any way to prove that beyond a shadow of a doubt? Maybe. I don't know yet. But that's the beauty of experimentation. When you can't measure something directly, you measure the effect it has on the world around it. Honestly, it might be impossible to figure out who's dominant or recessive, but what we can do is eliminate some options that we know for a fact are wrong. Just like standardized testing, alright? We're gonna take you right back to grade school. Let's go back to the presumption that soldier genes are recessive. Imagine every single one of mommy and daddy's genes have a dominant and a recessive allele. The dominant trait is expressed while the recessive trait stays dormant. At some point, mommy and daddy have two sets of twins. The first time they're fraternal twins, meaning two separate eggs were fertilized at the same time. When these twins are born, it turns out one kid got all the dominant genes from both parents while the other kid got the opposite. Genetically, these two children would be siblings, but their DNA would be completely different. Alright, so a couple years later, another set of twins are born. This time, they're identical twins, meaning a single fertilized egg split into two embryos. In this scenario, the twins are genetically identical. Whatever combination of dominant and recessive genes one kid has would be exactly the same as the other. So in terms of actual biology, there's absolutely zero chance for one snake clone to be completely dominant or recessive. Snake and Liquid are identical twins that came from the same egg, which is why their DNA is the same. Although, it's worth noting that Liquid says that he and Snake were born from two fertilized eggs.
So, it was you and I, two fertilized eggs with exactly the same DNA.
You might try and say that this is evidence that Liquid's words aren't to be trusted, but that's actually accurate. Identical siblings occur when a fertilized egg splits into multiple copies of itself. And that's exactly what happened with the twin snakes. A single fertilized egg was divided into identical octuplets, but 6 of those were coat-hangered.
He didn't just say what I think he did he?
Solidus is a different story though. Like Dolly the sheep, he was created using a cloning method that made his DNA 100% identical to Big Boss. This is gonna sound crazy, but hey, credit where credit's due. The cloning methods portrayed in the games are actually realistic. Game recognized game. All 3 clones were tampered with using gene therapy techniques, which is why they each had sterility, accelerated aging, and kung fu grip built in. Batteries sold separately. But Dr. Clark really took it to an extreme with the twin snakes. Just like the genome soldiers, gene therapy techniques were used to replace any undesirable traits. And by undesirable traits, I mean about 90% of the DNA they would have gotten from their egg donor.
That's an oddly specific number. Where'd you get that figure from?
Yeah, check this out. We were getting familiarized with MGS4 and we ran across this. So this is the Act 3 briefing, right? Naomi's going into the specifics of Snake and Liquid's genetics, and then boom, right here.
What am I looking at?
A breakdown of Snake and Liquid's DNA compared to Big Boss. 5.3% of Snake's DNA doesn't match his dad's, but the difference in Liquid's DNA is only 4.87%. In other words, Liquid's 0.43% more Big Boss than his dear brother.
It's all there, black and white, clear as crystal.
Nice.
So that's what Ocelot meant by superior.
And that's why Otacon was able to plant Liquid's body as a decoy after the tanker went under. Their DNA is over 99% similar. Even with high-end equipment, the margin of error in your average DNA analysis wouldn't even register that. So, it all checks out, right?
This is gonna ruffle some feathers. Good work, you two.
Let's go! That's what I'm talking about.
Don't get too excited. You've both got a ways to go before you can call yourselves gearheads.
Yeah, well, it sure as hell wasn't easy, boss. Before we found this, we had to sit through the most awkward sexual tension ever committed to screen. The cringe factor got so bad, both of us had to print a new set of vertebrae. We're out of calcium phosphate, by the way. Oh yeah, and look at this. Naomi also explains that the imperceptible difference between the clones is the reason why Foxdie affected Liquid and not Snake. Yeah, so Snake survived Foxdie because he's a fraction of a percent more Japanese than Liquid.
What was that? Go back. There. What are these kanji? Did you analyze them?
What for? It's just a bunch of pretentious bullshit, right? Yeah, I thought it was just part of the aesthetic.
I trained you better than that. You know damn well that isn't how that bastard operates.
Spades, let me get a upscale on monitor 12. Interpolate that. Then quantize pixels to nearest neighbor.
Can you digitize that and give me something that doesn't look like roadkill?
Let me see. Hold on.
Any intel on these floating around out there?
Somebody posted them on Reddit a while ago, hoping to learn their meanings, but no dice. As far as we can tell, they've never been translated.
Typical.
What?
These are all uncommon characters nobody uses.
What do you think, boss? Can you read them?
Even native speakers would have trouble with these. Send the details to my visor.
Heads up. They all have the same rain radical at the top. They must be using different kinds of precipitation as a metaphor for Big Boss and his kids.
Bingo. The Big Boss kanji can be translated as thunder, or bolt of lightning.
Oh, like Zeus, huh? The king of the castle.
The kanji for Snake and Solidus both mean hail, but this one means the particles are smaller than 5 millimeters.
Solid matter that flows like a liquid. That's actually pretty clever.
Careful, Icarus.
So what about Liquid's kanji?
I'm scanning it again. Spades, time for a firmware update.
Say that to my face, punk.
What was wrong with it the first time?
It's the only one of the 4 that doesn't come from a cloud.
Then what does it mean? Says here it means supremacy or leadership. Could be a reference to Liquid Ocelot. Doubt it. Like the boss said, it doesn't make any sense that it's the only one that doesn't have to do with the weather. Yeah, huh? Oh shit. What? Oh, shit. What? Oh, shit. Guys, you gotta see this. What? What is it? I looked up the meaning of that kanji in Chinese just to cover all our bases, and guess what the first definition is? What? Just say it. Quit playing around. It's dominate. Wait, what? Are you serious right now? Tell me you're joking. I'm serious. No, look, it's right there. It's dominate. Boss, this is it. This is the missing piece we've been looking for.
Get Konami on the phone. Once this gets out, they're gonna have an international incident on their hands.
You saying what I think you're saying?
Yeah. Time to present our list of demands.